Marcus had waited for this day for years, counting every coin, every saved paycheck, every extra hour he had worked. Buying a house was more than just owning property. It was the culmination of his sacrifices, the proof that all the nights he spent exhausted, skipping meals, and pushing through stress had not been in vain. He had dreamed of walking into a place he could call his own, decorating it, filling it with memories he would create on his own terms. He imagined the smell of fresh paint, the warmth of sunlight spilling into the living room, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in a place that was truly his. And now, finally, standing on the porch of the small, bright house on Maple Ridge, he felt a mix of triumph and relief. This house was the first real victory of his adult life. He had earned it, every bit of it. No one had handed him a cent. No one had helped with the down payment. Friends congratulated him. Co-workers clapped him on the shoulder, and for a moment, everything felt right. He had a key in his hand, the symbol of independence, the first tangible proof that he was no longer just the son in the shadow of his parents' expectations. He stepped inside and ran his hand along the smooth surfaces of the counters, imagining the furniture he would bring in, the life he would build. It was perfect, or so he thought. The knock on the door came suddenly, loud enough to make him start. Marcus had barely unpacked, the boxes still stacked neatly in corners, when he opened it to see his parents standing there. At first, he felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe they had come to congratulate him. Maybe they had finally accepted that he was capable of carving out his own path. But their faces told a different story. Cold, stiff, and unreadable, his parents held a stack of papers between them. Marcus froze, sensing that something was wrong before a word was even spoken. There was no smile, no warmth, only the distant, calm authority of two people who had made a decision and expected it to be obeyed. "We're filing a petition," his father said quietly, almost too calmly. "The house belongs to your sister." Marcus blinked. He felt as though someone had kicked the air out of his lungs. He wanted to laugh, to shake them and demand they explain, but nothing came. I bought this house," he stammered. "It's mine. I worked for it." His mother's eyes narrowed. "Your sister is getting married soon," she said, her voice firm but not raised. "She needs a place to start her life. You don't need something this big." Marcus's stomach dropped. He wanted to argue, to shout, but the words seemed small against the weight of their certainty. "You want me to give her my house?" he asked slowly, as if hearing the sentence aloud might make it vanish. "We're not asking," his father said. "We're taking it to court." A shock ran through Marcus, sharp and cold. His heart pounded. He had expected arguments over finances, maybe some minor disagreements, but this was betrayal. Not a betrayal of trust in the casual sense, but something deep, personal, and cutting. He had devoted years of his life to building a life he could call his own, and now his parents, the people who were supposed to guide and protect him, were attempting to take it all away. The papers in their hands felt like a hammer striking his chest. He looked at the documents, the neatly typed legal language that reduced his hard work to numbers, signatures, and clauses. There was no room for feelings, for sacrifices, for the late nights and long hours that had made the purchase possible. His life, in their eyes, was negotiable, disposable even, for the sake of his sister's comfort. Marcus's mind raced. He remembered all the times he had been sidelined, overlooked, and dismissed. He had spent his childhood hearing that his sister was the favorite, the bright one, the one destined for attention. He had learned to be quiet, to keep his desires small, to sacrifice without complaint. Every achievement he had celebrated quietly, every dream he had nurtured silently, because loudness brought criticism, and ambition brought guilt for overshadowing his sister. And now, as an adult, the same pattern repeated. He had finally broken free, made something entirely his, and still, they tried to pull him back into the shadows. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He let the papers fall into his lap as his parents stood waiting, their faces unreadable. He wanted to cry, to scream, to tell them how unfair it was, but he knew nothing he said would make a difference. Their minds were set. Their judgment was final. And in that moment, the taste of betrayal was bitter, sharp, and inescapable. When his parents finally turned to leave, Marcus felt a strange, cold clarity settle over him. The anger that burned in his chest was not wild, nor was it hasty. It was a quiet, simmering resolve, a recognition that he could not let this injustice pass without consequence. He did not want to harm them, not truly, but he could not allow them to decide his fate, to dictate the life he had worked for. As the door closed behind them, he looked around the house. The walls were bare, the floor still dusty from the final moving day, but it was still his. The boxes were reminders of his efforts, each taped corner a testament to his resilience, and yet, the joy that should have accompanied this moment was gone, replaced with a sharp, urgent need to protect what was his. That night, Marcus sat alone, the house eerily quiet around him. He walked from room to room, imagining how easy it would be for them to take this from him, how simple it would be to reduce everything he had done to a legal argument, and he realized that if he did nothing, that is exactly what would happen. This was more than a house. It was his proof of independence, a symbol of all the work he had done to be seen, to be recognized, to matter. And as he thought about the betrayal, a thought struck him with an almost physical force. They're going to regret this. It was not vengeance in the common sense. It was not about hatred or cruelty. It was a promise to himself, a declaration that he would not be powerless, that he would not be overlooked again. The fire in his chest was steady now, no longer a burst of anger, but a calm, deliberate energy. He would fight for what was his. He would make sure the years of sacrifice meant something. He thought of his sister, Clara, smiling confidently in her favorite role, the one that had always come easily to her. Marcus knew she believed she deserved everything, that life owed her success without struggle. He did not hate her. He only felt the sharp edge of injustice that had been honed by years of being second in every family decision, every birthday, every acknowledgement. The court case was looming, and the thought of the hearings, of presenting evidence, of speaking his truth, no longer frightened him. It challenged him, fueled him, and gave a purpose to the anger he carried. By the time the night deepened, Marcus had made an unspoken plan. He would not allow this to pass quietly. He would prepare, gather what he needed, and face the court not with threats or malice, but with the weight of reason, fairness, and truth. The house was his. He had earned it, and no one, not his parents, not the law, not even fate itself, would take it from him without a fight. For the first time that night, Marcus felt a spark of hope amidst the pain. The battle ahead would be difficult, emotionally draining, and exhausting. But he was ready. He had spent a lifetime preparing for a moment like this, unknowingly honing patience, resilience, and courage. And as he lay down on the floor of his empty living room listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, he whispered to himself, "I will not lose this. Not this time." The house, small and bright, with bare walls and unpacked boxes, became more than a structure. It became a symbol of defiance, a place where justice would be claimed, not through hatred, but through determination. And Marcus, who had spent years being overlooked, being dismissed, being told to sacrifice, finally realized that the fight for his life's work had only just begun. The courtroom had become a second home to Marcus, though a place he hated with every fiber of his being. Each hearing reminded him that what should have been a celebration the purchase of his first house, had turned into a battlefield. Legal terms, procedural motions, and the cold, impersonal language of the law replaced the warmth he had imagined when he first held the keys. Every day felt like a test, not of his ownership, but of his endurance, patience, and control over a growing storm inside him. Clara, his sister, sat across from him in court with an air of quiet confidence. She had always been the favored child, the one who glided through life effortlessly, drawing attention and praise like a magnet. Marcus had spent his childhood watching her take what he wanted, being told to step aside, to be patient, to let her shine. He had endured it silently, because he had no choice, and because confrontation had always been met with disapproval. Now, years later, the injustice was glaring. He had worked for this house, fought to own a space of his own, and yet here she was, claiming it as if it were owed to her. Marcus could see it in her eyes, the certainty that the court would favor her. She believed she deserved it, and in many ways, that belief was enough to give her confidence. "It's not personal," she whispered once in the courthouse hallway, leaning slightly so no one else could hear. "Mom and Dad always planned for me to settle down first. You'll understand someday." He stared at her, jaw tight, heart pounding. "It feels personal," he said, his voice low but steady. Her shrug, as casual as if they were discussing the weather, only stoked the fire in his chest. How could someone take what was rightfully his and act as though he was overreacting? How could they reduce his years of sacrifice to a simple family arrangement? At home, the fight seeped into every corner of Marcus's life. The house he had finally claimed as his sanctuary felt invaded, even when he was alone. The empty rooms echoed with reminders of what was at stake. Boxes waited to be unpacked, yet he couldn't bring himself to start. Every object he thought about placing on a shelf became a symbol of a battle he hadn't yet won. Sleep came in short bursts, and even then, his dreams were restless, filled with visions of courtroom battles, of his sister smiling triumphantly, of his parents looking at him as if he were ungrateful. The house was supposed to be freedom, yet it had become a cage filled with uncertainty. In these quiet hours, Marcus began to plan. He would not let them take the house without a fight. Not through anger or confrontation, but through preparation. He started gathering everything that could prove his case, the truth that would make it impossible for the court to overlook his years of effort. Receipts, messages, bank statements, records of payments he had made for the family, proof of sacrifices he had endured. Every detail mattered. He wanted to create a record that wasn't just about ownership, but about justice. As he collected the evidence, he wrestled with another force, more complex than anger: morality. Revenge whispered to him in quiet moments, tempting him to expose every slight, to humiliate his parents and sister, to make them feel the weight of the pain they had caused. But a part of him hesitated. He had seen how revenge destroyed people, how it left scars that never healed, how it could turn victory into emptiness. The thought of walking into court and shattering his family's image made his stomach twist. He could win, yes, but would he feel better or worse? Despite the internal struggle, the desire to protect what was his grew stronger every day. He reminded himself why he had worked so hard. Each late night at work, every skipped vacation, every moment spent putting someone else's needs ahead of his own, had led to this moment. He refused to be dismissed again, refused to have his life reduced to a simple arrangement that favored others. The house was more than walls and a roof. It was the embodiment of his independence, proof that he could achieve something without their approval. He also thought about Clara, the sister he had grown up loving despite the favoritism she received. He didn't want to hurt her. He wanted her to understand, perhaps, that life wasn't always about entitlement. But he knew she wouldn't see it that way. She had always believed that the world owed her, and the idea that she might lose something she felt was hers provoked surprise, and, he realized, a spark of fear. The realization that fear could teach a lesson without cruelty became part of his plan. He didn't have to humiliate. He just had to assert his right, firmly and unyieldingly. As the days passed, Marcus became methodical. He organized his evidence, rehearsed statements, and anticipated arguments from both his parents and sister. He imagined the questions the judge might ask, the motions that could be raised, and the ways they might try to discredit him. Each night, he ran through scenarios in his mind, weighing the impact of every word, every gesture, every tone of voice. He realized that preparation was as much a weapon as the law itself. Precision, clarity, and calm would carry him through. Anger would only cloud his judgment. And yet, beneath the surface of planning, the emotional storm continued. Every encounter with his family reminded him of the long history of neglect and favoritism. Every hearing, every document, every whisper in the hallway deepened the mix of hurt and determination. Marcus's internal struggle wasn't simple. He wanted to see justice done, but he also feared the corrosive effect of vengeance. Could he win and still retain his humanity, his compassion, his sense of self? Could he protect what was his without becoming the very thing he despised, a person consumed by bitterness and resentment? In quieter moments, he reflected on his parents. He remembered them not as adversaries but as flawed humans, making choices they believed were right. They had always favored Clara, believing they were helping her, ensuring she had security and comfort. And yet, their actions had cost him something profound: his sense of worth, his confidence in fairness, his trust. Marcus realized that understanding their motives didn't lessen the hurt, but it did shape his approach. He would fight, yes, but with intelligence and poise, not cruelty. Marcus's planning extended to his daily routines. He woke earlier to review documents, stayed late into the night refining arguments, and took notes on past interactions that could support his case. Every conversation, every shared memory, every documented contribution to the family's welfare became a potential piece of his narrative. He wanted to prove more than ownership. He wanted to assert that hard work, integrity, and perseverance mattered, that his life could not be dismissed for the convenience of others. As the weeks passed, a sense of calm began to emerge amidst the tension. Marcus felt stronger, more focused. The court case was no longer just a threat. It had become a test of character. The anger that had once threatened to overwhelm him had evolved into resolve, and the desire for revenge had taken a more strategic form. He did not seek to punish. He sought recognition, fairness, and the right to live in the home he had fought so hard to claim. Even Clara's confidence became a tool in his mind. He observed her carefully, noting patterns in her behavior, anticipating her arguments, understanding how she had always relied on her parents' favor. Marcus realized that the battle wasn't just legal, it was psychological. She believed she had certainty. He believed in evidence and principle. And he understood that preparation, clarity, and measured action could overcome arrogance and entitlement. Through it all, Marcus's emotions remained raw. He had moments of doubt, flashes of fear that the court might side with his parents, that years of struggle might vanish in a single ruling. But he refused to succumb to despair. Every setback became motivation. Every sleepless night became fuel. He reminded himself that control over his actions, over his preparation, over his response, was the only true power he held. By the time the final hearing approached, Marcus was ready. He had collected everything he needed, rehearsed his statements, and strengthened his resolve. But more importantly, he had confronted his own morality. He had wrestled with the desire for revenge, examined the consequences of every possible action, and found a path that allowed him to fight without destroying himself in the process. He was no longer merely reacting to betrayal. He was taking control, shaping the outcome with strategy, intelligence, and restraint. Marcus knew the confrontation would be tense. He expected his sister to be confident, his parents to be defensive, and the courtroom to be cold and formal. But he also knew that when he stepped forward, he carried with him not just evidence, but the truth of his life, the work of years, and the determination of someone who refused to be dismissed. The house, once a symbol of freedom, had become a symbol of perseverance and self-respect, and he would protect it at all costs, but without surrendering his humanity. As he stood in the quiet of his living room one evening, reviewing documents, under the dim light, Marcus realized that the journey had already changed him. The anger and hurt had been transformed into discipline and strategy. The desire for revenge had become a careful plan for justice. And the battle ahead, while daunting, was one he could face with clarity and resolve. The court would not just see a house. It would see the proof of a lifetime of dedication, sacrifice, and resilience. And Marcus would make sure they understood that justice was not about cruelty. It was about fairness, recognition, and the right to stand firm in the face of betrayal. The day of the final hearing arrived, and Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and quiet determination. The courthouse was busy, the hum of whispered conversations, shuffling papers, and the distant echo of gavel strikes filling the air. He stepped into the room, suit pressed, documents in hand, heart steady but pounding with adrenaline. Every moment of preparation, every sleepless night, every ounce of emotional energy he had poured into defending what was his would culminate in this one confrontation. Clara was there, radiant in her confidence as always, a subtle smile playing on her lips. She had spent years believing that life owed her everything, and now she expected the court to deliver it. His parents sat behind her, their faces carefully neutral, though Marcus could detect a flicker of tension in their eyes. For the first time, the certainty they had carried into this battle seemed slightly shaken. The judge entered, a stern presence that commanded silence. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he also felt a sense of clarity. He had planned for this. He knew what he wanted to say, how he would respond to objections, and how he would present the truth. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone, nor was he here to destroy his family. He was here to protect what he had earned, and that understanding gave him calm focus. When the judge called his name, Marcus rose. He walked to the front of the courtroom, his step steady. The air seemed thicker as he approached the bench, and he noticed Clara's eyes narrowing slightly, perhaps sensing the resolve in him. The judge asked him to speak, and for a moment, the room fell silent except for the quiet rustle of papers. Marcus took a breath and began. He spoke clearly, recounting the story of the house, the years of work, the sacrifices he had made, and the principles at stake. He avoided anger, avoiding the temptation to attack, but he did not soften the truth. He detailed the payments he had made, the work he had done to earn the property, and the efforts he had put into building a future of independence. Each word was deliberate, each sentence measured, designed to demonstrate fairness and reason rather than malice. Clara shifted in her seat, her confident expression flickering as she realized he was not pleading or begging. Marcus presented evidence, calmly, showing records of his work, bank statements, and documentation that proved the house was fully his investment. Every piece of evidence built a narrative not just of ownership, but of persistence, of someone who had been overlooked and undervalued for years, finally asserting themselves. His parents whispered to each other, and Marcus noticed the faint lines of uncertainty forming on their faces. They had believed they were acting in Clara's best interest, that the law and family obligation would align with their desires. Now, faced with Marcus's composed presentation, they were confronted with the consequences of their favoritism and the truth they could not deny. Marcus could feel their discomfort, but he did not relish it. This was not about revenge. It was about fairness, about claiming what was rightfully his while remaining true to his principles. The judge listened carefully, asking pointed questions about payments, ownership, and family agreements. Marcus answered each calmly, maintaining composure even when Clara attempted to interject or redirect the narrative. He noticed subtle shifts in her posture, a slight hesitation in her tone, a brief glance toward their parents that revealed uncertainty. Marcus realized that the confidence she had always relied on was fragile when faced with preparation, truth, and reasoned defense. Hours passed, and the courtroom atmosphere grew tense. Marcus felt the weight of expectation, but also the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done everything in his power to assert his rights. The judge finally paused, reviewing the documents and listening to closing statements from both sides. Marcus stood quietly, hands folded, heart steady, and waited for the verdict. He did not rush the moment. He allowed it to carry its full weight. When the judge finally spoke, Marcus's stomach twisted with anticipation. The ruling was in his favor. The house was legally his. The words echoed in the room, and for a fleeting moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel the release of tension, the relief that came from being acknowledged, from having his years of work recognized. But the emotional payoff was more than just legal victory. It was a validation of self-worth, a confirmation that he could assert himself without resorting to cruelty or vengeance. Outside the courtroom, Marcus's parents approached him cautiously. Their voices were quiet, uncertain, searching for a response from the son they had underestimated for years. Marcus nodded, keeping his expression calm. He did not lecture, scold, or demand apologies. He did not need to. He had claimed his space, established his boundaries, and proven that his life, his efforts, and his achievements were his to command. Clara lingered behind, a mixture of disbelief and frustration on her face. Marcus felt a flicker of empathy. She had grown up believing she was entitled, only to be confronted with the reality that life was not automatic in its rewards. Yet he felt no need to gloat. He had learned that satisfaction from revenge was fleeting, that the true strength came from acting with integrity while defending oneself. He allowed her to process the loss without interference. Walking back to his house that evening, Marcus felt the sunlight spilling through the courthouse windows, warming his face. Each step was lighter than the last, and as he approached his front door, he realized something profound. Victory was not about punishment or resentment. It was about standing firm, protecting what was his, and maintaining his principles despite provocation. The house, once a symbol of struggle and potential loss, now represented resilience, fairness, and the power of self-respect. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of new beginnings. The house was quiet, unassuming, yet filled with the energy of hard work, perseverance, and personal triumph. Boxes still waited to be unpacked, walls remained bare, but Marcus did not see emptiness. He saw potential. This was a space that belonged to him, created through effort and dedication, and he would fill it with the life he had imagined. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to sit in the living room and feel peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes from temporary victories, but a steady, enduring calm that came from knowing he had acted justly and deliberately. He had faced betrayal, confrontation, and the temptation for revenge, and yet he had emerged not embittered, but strengthened. The battle had tested him, challenged his emotions, and forced him to consider the consequences of his actions, but it had also reaffirmed his values and self-worth. Marcus reflected on his parents, on Clara, and on the complex web of emotions that had brought him to this point. He understood their perspectives, even if he could not condone their actions. He saw the human flaws that had led to favoritism and misjudgment, and he realized that understanding did not require forgiveness, only acceptance. He had gained clarity. Revenge was tempting, but it rarely healed. What healed was standing firm, asserting boundaries, and protecting one's life without surrendering one's principles. The house, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary. The quiet rooms echoed with promise rather than tension. Marcus knew the road ahead would continue to require effort, planning, and resilience, but he also knew that he had laid the foundation for his future, not through retaliation, but through steadfast action and measured determination. He had chosen not to destroy, but to preserve, not to humiliate, but to assert, not to retaliate, but to protect. As the evening light poured through the windows, Marcus walked from room to room, imagining the life he would build. The house would witness celebrations, quiet moments, laughter, and reflection. It would hold memories that were entirely his, and for the first time, he truly felt at home. The legal battle, the tension with family, the emotional turmoil, all of it had brought him here, to a place where he could breathe, create, and live freely. He placed the keys on the kitchen counter, feeling their weight not as a symbol of conflict, but as a symbol of achievement and independence. He whispered to himself, softly, "I'm finally home." There was no triumph in malice, no satisfaction in revenge, only the quiet joy of a life reclaimed, a space earned, and a boundary established. Marcus had faced betrayal, wrestled with anger, planned carefully, and emerged victorious, not because he had destroyed anyone, but because he had protected himself and what was rightfully his. In that moment, the house felt alive. Every beam, every wall, every corner reflected the effort, resilience, and thoughtfulness that Marcus had poured into his life. It was more than a structure. It was a testament to perseverance, patience, and integrity. Marcus realized that while revenge might have offered temporary satisfaction, real fulfillment came from acting with principle, asserting oneself, and building a future that no one could take away. And as he sat in the quiet of his living room, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, Marcus understood a truth that had been buried beneath anger, fear, and pain. Revenge might promise relief, but justice, self-respect, and deliberate action offered lasting peace. He had faced the ultimate test, and he had passed, not by tearing others down, but by standing tall, defending his life, and honoring his own worth. Marcus had fought for his house, for his independence, and for himself. And now, finally, he could live without fear, without resentment,